Recording with external microphone. System sound volume set to 100%.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this second voice note from me. Um, by the way, the one thing that I forgot to mention is that I'll be attaching my phone number with each voice note, and if you have any problems or queries, you can contact me. Call me and take appointment, and at the appointed time, I'd address your problems and queries. Well, let's get back to Chaucer then. You see, Chaucer was a successful man, and he had a rose-colored vision of the world. Now he was forward-looking, and his poetry shows an influence of French literature. His most famous and most mature work is called Canterbury Tales. Canterbury, Canterbury Tales. Now, this is in fact a collection of stories told by a number of pilgrims, about 15 in number. In fact, they are going on pilgrimage, and in order to pass the time during the travel, they decide to tell the stories. Chaucer describes almost each pilgrim and then, of course, narrates his or her story. So, this work, reflects the society of his time. It was composed in the Middle English, but its translation in modern English is available. If you want, you can sort of go one or two stories by Chaucer. You can easily get hold of it online, or get it from the library. It's available in the Azad Library. Okay, so in 1400, medieval era came to an end. Now, the next important development from our point of view occurs in 1452. This was the year when the very famous movement in the world, Renaissance, started. It deserves a mention in literature and in other subjects also. Renaissance literally means rebirth of Greek knowledge and learning. During this period, science also underwent a lot of development, and the writers and poets who were influenced by Renaissance, showed a lot of interest in logic, intellect, and their works had a moral, that is, a moral lesson. And in 1450, that is, the great Italian poet called Dante, composed a great poem called Divine Comedy, in which he showed influences of the Renaissance. But from our point of view, you see, as far as English poetry is concerned, Renaissance had its influence on the poets and writers of the 16th century. In 16th century, remember, by the way, that Shakespeare was born in 1564 and passed away in 1616. This era in English poetry is known as the Shakespearean Age or the Elizabethan Age. Queen Elizabeth was ruling Great Britain at that time. And do you know who was ruling India at that time? Well, yes, you were right. It was Akbar the Great, Akbar-e-Azam. Now, sorry, I'll come to Shakespeare. But the two poets which deserve special mention as far as Renaissance is concerned are Edmund Spenser and Sir Philip Sidney. Edmund Spenser, Spencer, Edmund Spenser, and Sir Philip Sidney Phlip Sydney. Philip Sidney. Spencer is sometimes called the second father of English poetry. That's because he combined so many trends and movements, On one hand, he had, the influence of romances, and on the other hand, he had the influence of Renaissance. He used allegory, he was logical, his poetry showed a lot of intellect and learning, and there were so many references from Greek mythology as well. And he used allegory, allegory you studied last session while doing your last poem, that is the Ajamil and the Tiger. The Ajamil and the Tiger. So, he made use of allegory as well. He's a converging point, and he's often considered to be the second father of English poetry. Now, Sir Philip Sidney also composed sonnets. In fact, this was the age of sonnets. Everyone almost tried a hand at composing sonnets, and the great English poet Shakespeare composed as many as 154 sonnets apart from his plays, which showed a great variety of moods, attitudes, feelings, emotions, imagery, and so on. So, you see, this was the Elizabethan era, and it influenced generations to come. The Romantics, in particular, drew inspirations from Shakespeare and Elizabethans, Now, about this time, another school of poetry was coming into existence known as metaphysical poets. Two poets deserve mention with regard to metaphysical poetry, that is John Donne, which is prescribed for us, and Andrew Marvell. That's Andrew and Marvel, Andrew Marvell. Now, we'll talk of this school in great detail and about John Donne when we take up our poem. So, for the time being, I skip it. And I come to John Milton, who is in your course. And I don't remember the exact date of birth, but he was born in the first decade of the 17th century. John Milton was a great poet. He composed serious poetry that had glimpses of his wide learning. He was a voracious reader, and his poetry showed a lot of learning and intellect. And he composed, one of the world's greatest epics called Paradise Lost, which is the story of Adam and Eve, how they ate the forbidden fruit and how they were banished ultimately from heaven, and how they were forgiven by God and then ultimately blessed. And then, he also made inventions as far as language is concerned. In Paradise Lost itself, the opening sentence, the usual English syntax is subject, verb, and object in active form, but he reverts it, or rather inverts, reverts it, changes it. He begins with object and then puts the subject and then puts the verb and subject. Says something like, of that first disobedience of man, this is the object. Then there are a few lines, and then he says sing, which is verb, and then comes the object, which is O Muse. So, of that first great disobedience of man, sing, O Muse. I recite it with ellipses. I skip a few lines in between. I want to tell you the structure of the sentence here, the invention that he made. It's called the Miltonic inversion. And some other poets also followed it. So Milton was a stalwart, a great poet, and I think when the other teacher would do Milton,
Screen off.
she would definitely speak about it in detail. So Milton died soon after Restoration in 1660. Now, after Milton, the most noteworthy development occurs in the 18th century. You see, in the beginning of the 17th century, there came into existence a school of poetry known as the Neoclassic or the Augustans. Augustan. It was known as the Augustan Age. I'll tell you why. You see, the two great poets of this era are John Dryden, Dryden, and Alexander Pope. Now, these poets believed in following precise rules of prosody, that is, meter, rhyme, forms of poetry, and so on. They abstained from bringing in personal element, and their poetry was completely focused on social issues, and satires were composed. Two great poems of this era are Macflecknoe, Macflecnoe by John Dryden, and Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope. The first one was a political satire, the other one was a satire on human society. And by the way, you must have read Gulliver's Travel, which is a satire on humanity, which that is a work in prose. I just mentioned it. So these poets, in fact, imitated the Roman poets, classical Roman poets. That's why they are called neoclassic. Neo means new, and they are called Augustan because they imitated those poets from Rome who lived at a time when King Augustus was ruling Rome. So that's why this age is sometimes called the Augustan age. So Alexander Pope and Dryden. Now you see, we have come to the end of this voice note. We will continue our discussion in the next voice note. Till then, goodbye from me.
131. Charging. Phone. Swipe with 2 fingers to unlock the screen. Phone. Button. Swipe with 2 fingers to unlock the screen. Device unlocked. Edit box. Voice up Hindi news. Voice recorder. Voice recorder. Pause. Button.